Christy Wesselman was born on April 19, 1970, in Glen Ellen, Illinois. She lived there with her mother, 2 older brothers, and a sister. The town was known as one of the safest in the region, and Christy loved spending time outdoors. She would spend hours roaming the streets with other neighborhood kids. At school, Christy was well-liked and had many friends. She was very involved in school activities and was even elected vice president of her class. In addition to that, she played both volleyball and softball. During the summer of 1985, 15-year-old Christy was attending summer classes at school and spent most of her free time with her friends. On July 21st, Christy arrived home from school at around 3:30 p.m. Shortly after getting home, she decided to walk to a nearby store to buy a soda and a chocolate bar for herself and her mom. Her mother expected her to return within minutes since the store was just a short distance away. But as more time passed, it became clear that something was wrong because Christy wasn't coming back. At first, her mother assumed she might have run into some friends and gone off with them. At that time, there were no cell phones, so she had no way to reach Christy and could only wait. As evening approached, her concern kept growing. She began calling Christy's friends, but none of them had seen her that day. Becoming increasingly desperate, she decided to go to the store herself, scanning the streets along the way, but there was no sign of Christy anywhere. Christy's family spent the next several hours searching for her, but when there was still no trace of her by 1:50 a.m., her mother finally contacted the police. Officers quickly joined the search, beginning by retracing Christy's last known steps. They first spoke with the clerk at the store she had visited. The man knew Christy well, as he lived nearby and had even babysat her when she was younger. He confirmed that Christy had stopped by around 4 p.m., bought some chocolate bars, and left. She hadn't said where she was going, but the clerk mentioned that she appeared cheerful, and nothing about her behavior seemed out of the ordinary. Police also located a few other witnesses who had seen Christy at the store, but none could remember which direction she went afterward. Investigators questioned all of Christy's friends, considering the chance that she might have lost track of time while spending time with them, but none of her friends had seen her that day. The police then concentrated all their efforts on the search, combing through the streets. However, by that point, it was already the middle of the night, making the search much more difficult. Despite their determination, there was no trace of Christy, no clues, no leads, nothing at all. The search went on into the early morning, and by midday, a new team of officers took over. One of them suggested retracing Christy's likely route. He assumed that she had probably taken the shortest way from her house to the store, a shortcut through a nearby field. At that time, a large vacant lot filled with tall grass separated the residential area from the store. Walking around it would take much longer. For adults driving cars, that wasn't an issue, but local kids who regularly went to the store or the nearby McDonald's always used the shortcut through the field, where a narrow path had been worn into the grass. The detective decided to follow this trail. As he moved along it, something strange caught his attention in the grass. Pushing through the overgrowth, he realized it was a human body, and he immediately recognized Christy. He quickly called for backup, and the body was turned over to the medical examiners for further examination. Forensic experts thoroughly searched the crime scene for evidence, but their efforts came up empty. No footprints, no personal items, nothing that could explain what had happened. The medical examiner determined that Christy had been killed by 8 stab wounds. They also found signs of sexual assault and collected the perpetrator's biological material. However, in 1985, DNA testing was still in its early stages and rarely used in criminal cases. Without the means to analyze it, the sample was preserved for future testing. Christy's mother also helped investigators uncover another important detail. Christy had been wearing a pearl ring on her finger that day. Yet, the ring was missing, either on her body nor anywhere at the scene. Detectives concluded that the killer might have taken it, and instructed all officers to monitor pawn shops in case the murderer tried to sell it. With no physical evidence to rely on, police shifted their focus to finding witnesses who might have seen Christy or her killer near the field. They managed to locate several people who had walked the same path around the estimated time of the murder, but none reported noticing anything suspicious. It was strange, considering that Christie's body was only a few yards off the trail, though it was hidden by the tall grass, making it nearly impossible to see. Investigators also discovered that just a few dozen yards from where Christie's body was found, a family had been hosting a barbecue in their backyard. Yet, despite being so close, none of them recalled seeing or hearing anything unusual. A gas station employee working about 60 yards from the field also completed his entire shift that day without noticing anything out of the ordinary. To police, the situation was baffling. So many people had been near the scene, yet no one saw or heard a thing. Investigators theorized that the unidentified attacker either followed Christie from the store to the field or crossed paths with her along the way. He likely led her just a few yards into the tall grass and killed her there, all without making a sound. Detectives considered that Christie might have known her killer, which could explain the lack of any screams. After all, it was a small town where most residents knew each other. Police began looking into all the men who were acquainted with Christie, but that line of inquiry led nowhere. They also compiled a list of men in the area with prior convictions for violent crimes. Several suspects were investigated, but none could be connected to the murder. For months, police made little progress in solving the case. They continued pursuing tips and new suspects, but every lead ended in failure. This continued for 3 long years until an unexpected breakthrough came in 1988. By then, DNA analysis had become an important tool in criminal investigations. Detectives decided to collect DNA samples from everyone who had been considered a suspect in Christie's case over the years. Many agreed to cooperate, and none of their samples matched the biological evidence from the scene. But there was one man who refused to provide his DNA, Dana Henry, a 34-year-old who lived near the field where Christie's body had been found. He had been on police radar since the early days of the case. At the time, Henry denied any involvement in the crime, but his refusal now made detectives seriously doubt his innocence. Police sought a court order to obtain his DNA. Henry appeared at the hearing, still insisting he was innocent. However, he was held in contempt of court and kept in a local jail cell for several days. Only after that did Henry agree to give a DNA sample. In the end, his DNA did not match the killer's, and Henry was released. Afterward, he told reporters that he had been held in a cell without clothing and was only released after succumbing to immense pressure and reluctantly agreeing to provide a sample. Henry said he had spent about $50,000 in legal fees, a large sum at the time. He had to mortgage his house, which he eventually lost, and many of his friends and family turned away from him. Angry and disheartened, Henry filed a lawsuit against the police department, but it led nowhere. Even after DNA evidence proved his innocence, some people continued to believe he was guilty. Years later, Henry told reporters that the entire experience had destroyed his life, even though he was never officially charged with any crime. For another year, Christie's case remained unsolved until 1989, when an unexpected twist brought it back into focus. A judge issued a restraining order against a local man who had been harassing the victim's family with tips about who he believed had killed Christie. The man, named Willis, had first contacted Christie's relatives in late 1985. He claimed to know who the killer was and began sending them supposed leads. Each tip was checked by police, but every time, it turned out to be far-fetched or completely irrelevant to the case. This went on for nearly 4 years until Christie's family couldn't take it any longer. They filed a complaint, and a judge issued an order prohibiting Willis from ever contacting them again. After the restraining order, police decided to investigate Willis himself, but found no evidence connecting him to the murder. The killer's DNA was entered into the FBI database, but no matches were found. The case remained cold for many years. From time to time, police revisited it, chasing down new tips, but they never came any closer to identifying the killer. This went on for 3 full decades. Over the years, the original investigators had all retired or moved on, and Christie's case was assigned to a new team. Then in 2015, something completely unexpected happened. One day, they received a notification from the FBI database. The DNA from Christie's killer matched a recently uploaded profile. The DNA belonged to a 62-year-old man named Michael Jones, who lived in a small town called Champaign, about 150 miles from Christie's home. Jones's DNA had been entered into the database after his arrest for domestic violence. His wife had reported him to police, leading to his arrest. Under an Illinois law passed in 2002, anyone accused of a crime was required to provide a DNA sample. Interestingly, the main supporter of that law was the state's attorney from the same county where Christie's murder had occurred, and that very case had been a major reason behind his campaign to get the legislation approved. As soon as the DNA match was confirmed, investigators immediately began digging into Michael Jones. The first striking detail was that his name had never appeared in the case before. He wasn't a suspect, a witness, or even someone remotely connected to the investigation. Detectives hadn't even known he existed. Michael Jones had a long criminal record. His first encounter with law enforcement occurred in the mid-1970s when he assaulted a woman. For reasons unknown, he seemed to escape any serious punishment. Just a year later, Jones attacked a 27-year-old woman, assaulted her, and left her in a hospital parking lot. When police issued a warrant for his arrest, Michael turned himself in. During his trial, he expressed remorse and claimed to have great respect for the law, saying that was why he had surrendered voluntarily. Jones also claimed to suffer from severe mental health issues and said he needed professional help. However, an independent psychiatrist determined that he was fully aware of his actions. Consequently, Jones was sentenced to 10 to 20 years in prison. As expected, Michael was released early for good behavior. He served only 6 years of his sentence and was back on the streets by 1983, 2 years before Christie's murder. What made this even worse was that his previous victim had not been informed of his early release. Later, she said that if she had known, she would have done everything possible to prevent it. A year after his release, Michael got married, but in 1994, his first wife left him and obtained a restraining order. The reason was his disturbing interest in one of her young relatives. Despite this alarming behavior, no formal charges were filed. In 1999, Michael was arrested again, this time for assaulting a family member of his new girlfriend. Detectives also learned that Michael often took long solo motorcycle trips and frequently visited relatives in Chicago. Since Christie's town was located along his route, it's possible he passed through the area on his way to visit family. If that were the case, it would explain why he had never come to the detectives' attention. If Michael had only been in town for a few hours, tracking his presence would have been nearly impossible. Christie's mother said she had never heard his name before. When police first called her about Michael, she didn't think much of it. Over the years, investigators had contacted her many times with questions, so she assumed this was just another one of those calls. But everything changed when police obtained a fresh DNA sample from Michael while he was in prison and confirmed once and for all that he was the killer. They met with Christie's mother in person to deliver the news. After all those years, the man who had murdered her daughter had finally been caught. Before formally charging Michael with Christie's murder, detectives spoke with his ex-girlfriend and uncovered more details about him. She described Michael as a man with a volatile temper, calm one moment, then suddenly enraged for no reason. She also mentioned that he was obsessed with detective novels and crime shows on TV. This information made investigators suspect that Michael might not have been responsible for only Christie's murder, but possibly other unsolved crimes as well. His frequent solo trips, criminal background, and fascination with crime stories suggested that he may have known how to conceal his tracks and avoid leaving evidence behind. After building their case, police officially charged him on September 18, 2015, and Michael denied any involvement in Christie's death. The case eventually went to trial, but it took 3 long years before it began. The trial didn't start until 2018. Prosecutors pursued a life sentence, but Michael chose to plead guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence. As part of the deal, he didn't have to disclose any details about the murder. Still, with the DNA evidence, there was no doubt about his guilt. Consequently, the judge sentenced him to 80 years in prison, with eligibility for parole no earlier than 2095. In other words, Michael will almost certainly never be released. Christie's family expressed their gratitude to the investigators for finally solving the case. Christie's mother also voiced her anger over Michael's early release in 1983, pointing out that if he had served his full sentence, he never would have had the opportunity to harm her daughter, and Christie would still be alive. Henry, the man once suspected of the crime, also attended the trial of the actual killer. In a later interview, he said the accusations had destroyed his life and that even decades later, he still hadn't fully recovered. He hoped that seeing justice done would bring him some peace, but it didn't. Henry also revealed that throughout all those years, no one from the police department had ever apologized to him, nor had anyone been held accountable for the damage they caused to his life. If you found this case intriguing, make sure to like and subscribe. We upload new crime case videos every night. Stay tuned and brace yourself for what's coming next.